Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone, and welcome to episode 278 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Con Whiteley. And today's episode is on what are the 4 categories of psychotic symptoms? And it is Saturday, the 13th of July 2024, as I record this. So, today's episode, I wanted to return to a clinical psychology by focusing on psychosis. So, psychosis is one of those conditions that we hear a lot about, but we aren't always sure what exactly psychosis is, but more importantly, we don't always know the different types of symptoms. Whereas at least in my experience, everyone always thinks psychosis is literally just delusions and hallucinations. But no, it's so much more. And when we look at this more nuanced debate, psychosis is absolutely fascinating, and I flat out loved it. So this is why today's episode is a really useful and really important to look at, because we're going to be exploring the 4 categories, what are these 4 categories made up of, and we're all going to really deepen our understanding of psychosis. So you've got that to look forward to in the content part of today's episode. So moving on to the psychology news section, we're going to be reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest. So the first one is, mixed emotions may not be mixed after all. As the name would imply, we tend to think of mixed emotions as a blend of different, often contrasting emotions, but new research suggests that might not be the case. In their recent paper in Cerebral Cortex, Anthony Liccardo and team gathered fMRI data from 27 participants as they watched a bittersweet short film called One Small Step. At points, participants were experiencing mixed emotions. The neuronal activity suggested that they weren't just rapidly shifting between positive and negative affective states. In fact, mixed feelings were associated with specific patterns of activity in the amygdala and nucleus accumbens, which differed from patterns seen during exclusively positive and negative emotions. According to the authors, this finding suggests that mixed emotions are a separate emotional experience rather than being a true mix of 2 or more feelings. Okay, now that is interesting. One, because I absolutely love fMRI data. I think fMRIs are really quite brilliant because for people who don't know what fMRI are, it means that it stands for Functional Magnetic Resonance Imaging. And the really amazing thing about it is that it measures oxygen levels in the brain now. And this is important because the area of the brain that we're using more has more oxygenated, rich blood, which allows us to track which areas of the brain we're using more often. And we can correlate different brain areas with different abilities, different emotional states. So I always find fMRI data brilliant. Personally, I would absolutely love to do research with it in the future, but my sort of research areas don't really overlap with fMRI data, and let's face it, they're expensive. They're extremely expensive, so the chance of you being able to do research with it at all is quite limited unless you're really rich or unless you've got some great funding behind you, which, let's face it, no one does these days. So, secondly, and to be honest, more importantly, I think this is a very good example of perhaps humans just trying to find vocabulary and humans just trying to find words to describe a feeling of something they don't understand. Because mixed feelings, whenever we say, "Oh, I've got mixed feelings about that," what does that actually mean? I think that's just a word we use, but in reality, I think it means that we aren't sure what we're feeling. So saying that we've got mixed emotions, so I think the word mixed emotions is just something that we use to describe what we're feeling without it being true or without that being how we actually feel though, because I think that there might be times where we have positive and then negative feelings about something, but saying they happen at the same time, as this research shows, that isn't that isn't what happened. And I think when we say we've got mixed emotions, that's just us trying to describe something we don't understand. But now, with this research, will help us to understand that when we say we've got mixed emotions, we actually haven't. We're experiencing something that we're just starting to explore, especially when it comes to this neuroimaging data. So I think next steps would be to continue in like investigating this, just so we understand what actually is this series of mixed emotions and this very specific neuroactivity that happens when we say we're experiencing mixed emotions. So it's a very interesting study, and could this be groundbreaking? I don't know, but I think it's really, really interesting and definitely food for thought. So, the second one is hybrid workers are more satisfied and quit less. Though some corporations have pushed for a return to the office, many hybrid working has become something they'll fight to keep. Others, of course, miss the social and community aspect of physically shared workspaces, leading to ongoing debate about whether in person working should be expected. According to the authors Nicholas Bloom, Robin Hahn, and James Lang, their latest study presented the first randomized control trial to investigate the benefits of embracing hybrid working. Their findings, published in Nature, draw from the experiences of 1,612 graduate employees of Trip.com who were randomly assigned to work hybridly or on site for 6 months. Those in the hybrid group not only reported greater job satisfaction, better work life balance, and higher life satisfaction at the end of the study, but data showed that they resigned at a significantly lower rate than the fully on site group, 33% lower, in fact. Contrary to a often cited concern about reduced productivity outside of the office, those in the hybrid group were also as productive as their physically on location peers. So there's a lot about this study I love. First of all, sample size. Let's just go for it because it's easy, but I also really like it. 1,600 participants. That's really good because the sample size that big should allow you to run some really good and also quite reliable statistical tests with a good credibility. So that's always good. Good though. I also quite like it that they did a randomized control trial, just you can actually see the cause and effect relationship. So that helps to increase the validity of the study, and that's really, really good though. On the downside, they only used employees from one company. So, and Trip.com, I'm not familiar with it, but presumably it's a travel company. So I guess there are certain people that are drawn to that. And I think that you can't generalize this to the general population because I think at a push you can only apply it to the travel and tourism industry. Industry though, I mean with empirical backing, simply because you've only used employees from one company, but it's still a really good study. Oh, I think more generally, I think this does go to show that personally I've never really understood the whole people have to get back to the office mentality, because if you know the history of the education system and basically the education system is no longer fit for purpose because the education system was designed in the 19th and 20th century to create workers, not thinkers. And when I say workers, what I mean is that the education system is basically meant to produce factory workers who don't think, don't question, and don't have any critical thinking skills. So that's where that mentality comes from, I think. But as we move into the modern world and we have a lot more challenges and we need to solve them, we actually do need to embrace this hybrid working over. So thankfully, this study does go to show that embracing hybrid working can be very, very good. So if you're interested in business psychology, I hope you enjoyed it. So the last one is Children of the Replication Crisis. Oh, okay. Open quote. It's 2011, and a series of landmark events are about to plummet psychology into an ongoing period of deep reflection. These events would leave Plusser and Wagamakers 2012 to ask in a special journal issue on the replication of psychological science whether the field was facing a crisis of confidence. An answer came from one of the largest replication efforts in psychology's history. In 2015, the Open Science Collaboration shared the results of a three-year-long project where they attempted to replicate 100 randomly selected studies from 3 prestigious psychology journals using the original materials and high-powered designs. Only 36% of studies successfully replicated, with significant effects in the same direction as the original studies, and the effect size is half the size. Social psychology fared particularly bad, with only 25% of effects replicated. Open Science Collaboration 2015. Shockwaves spread across the discipline. Psychology had indeed found itself amidst a replication crisis. I am a child of this replication crisis. Close that quote. And then it goes on to introduce Dr. Charlotte Pennington as she shares her experiences and powerful thoughts on the importance of teaching students how open science can reform psychology. And this is something that, at least at my university, we've actually spoken about quite a bit, though, because for my dissertation, we actually had to do pre-registrations for it. So not official ones, but we had to pretend that we were going to do one there, because pre-registration and open science is absolutely critical for any science, but especially psychology, because we have had a replication crisis and that has damaged us so badly. I mean, it's where quite a lot of the comments, quite a lot of the myths, and quite a lot of misconceptions that I've actually had to deal with in the past few years have all come from, because this replication crisis, especially that Dutch researcher, which I cannot really remember. So we've had the replication crisis, people falsifying quite important data. So, I mean, psychology has gone through a rough period, but equally, psychology is still not perfect. But I'm still proud of the discipline that we've worked so far, and universities and students are really hammering home the importance of making sure what we do is empirically valid, and we design our experiments to become a lot more bulletproof through our methodologies, through our research skills. So this is something that we're always going to have to work with. We're always going to have to deal with the past, and this is why redoing research is important. And to be honest, I could do an entire podcast episode about how to do better research and how we avoid the replication crisis ever happening again. And to be honest, I could talk about open science quite a bit, but I'm not, because that's not the point of this episode. But definitely look it up, get interested, And please never see this as a waste of time, because this is so important to the credibility of our profession, who, let me remind you, saves lives and can be really important and transforms lives for the better. If psychology gets discredited through yet another replication crisis, all that work, all these people that we help will not have us. So it's interesting, it's fruitful, and it's very, very important. So I really hope that you enjoyed the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So my week has been really lovely, to be fair, because I've been finishing off the summer core period at my university as a student and ambassador, and it's been conservation week. So we've been doing like lots of really fun session with the kids, including homemaking aloe vera. We've been pigment painting using like natural elements like teas, flowers, matcha tea. I still maintain matcha tea is disgusting. It smells disgusting, it looks disgusting, it tastes disgusting. I do not like matcha tea, but you can paint with it, which was actually really interesting in Natural Snem. And then like we've also done like lots of other sessions. So, besides from that, in my personal life, I've also been having to do stuff quite candidly this week because I cut my finger quite badly. So, last Sunday, so by the time this podcast episode comes out, that would have been like 8 days ago. So, I've been having to like do everything one-handed this week whilst my finger heals. And I mean, like, I've definitely got a lot more appreciation for my forefinger on my left hand. I didn't realize I used it so much. I didn't realize how amazing it was, because you only really start to miss stuff when you can no longer use it. So that's been annoying. But my finger's healing like quite nicely, and I should be able to start using it tomorrow. And I've also been doing like lots of other fun stuff though. But starting from like next week, that I will be starting to get back to more psychology stuff, which will be good. And as always, I always love to know your thoughts and feelings on today's episode, so you can always email me at connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment at the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always tweet me on Twitter at sci-fi whiteley. I always love to hear from all of you, because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Clinical Psychology Second Edition. So today's sponsored product is a really good fit for today's episode, because a Clinical Psychology Second Edition went through a major update, just so it really does teach you at quite a good level. You have a really good foundation under you. What is a clinical psychology, and what are some of the past influences, but also what is formulation, as this is tailor-made psychotherapy, which is the direction that modern clinical psychology is going in. So if you want to work in clinical psychology in the future, then formulation is an absolutely brilliant topic anyway. I love it. You cannot beat it. And I always enjoy learning more about it. But then there's also quite a few new updated sections. So when it comes to formulation, including like what is a transdiagnostic formulation, which is when you do a formulation, which is for people who have multiple mental health conditions, and that is really interesting. But then we also talk about lots of other fascinating areas, all were focused on how does a clinical psychologist ultimately improve someone's life and to help them. Right, for example, like the mindfulness sections, they have a lot of fun, and they can be quite brutal in a sense, but they're really useful, and they're also quite balanced in the sense that yes, mindfulness can be good, but it can also be bad. We also look at the mental capacity act, one of my favourite sections of all time. I flat out love the mental capacity act. It's amazing. It's a great piece of legislation, and even if you want a UK reader, I still highly recommend it because it's really interesting, and there's a lot of principles that you can apply to your own clinical work. And then there are so many other great areas which I really do love about this book. So that's Clinical Psychology, second edition, available from all the major ebook retailers, and you can order the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. So whilst buying books helps to support the creation and the editing of the podcast, my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and as always, a massive thank you to my patrons. Your support shows that you like the show and you want it to continue. So if you wanted to become a patron of the show and get access to tons of great rewards, now you can at patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you wanted to support the podcast on a one-off basis, then now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Wiley. So that's enough for personalising. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about what are the 4 categories of psychotic symptoms. So this is a really useful podcast episode, so let's dive into it. What are the positive symptoms of psychosis? So I certainly think that the term positive is one of the weirdest terms in psychology, because there is nothing good, exciting or happy about psychotic symptoms, and they can be extremely de-stressing to individuals with the condition. Yet what positive actually means in this context is additional experience. Therefore, when we talk about positive symptoms, what we actually mean is symptoms that add a extra experience to the client's lives or perceptions. 2 examples of this include hallucinations as well as delusions. Hallucinations are internally generated sensory experiences because there is nothing in the person's environment that is generating these voices, visions, smells, noises, or tactile experiences that are very real to the person. Interestingly, smells, taste, and tactile experiences are very rare hallucinations to experience in psychosis without there being an underlying medical condition or the effects of a substance. If a client is experiencing these 3 symptoms, then they should be referred for a medical evaluation. On the other hand, delusions are fixed false beliefs that people with psychosis hold with great conviction because they are convinced these beliefs are true even without any supporting evidence. At times, these delusions are believable or plausible in nature, and these are known as non-bizarre delusions. For example, if someone with psychosis believes they might be cheating on, they might be pregnant, have a disease, or someone is plotting against them. Personally, I wasn't sure if I was just going to include this in today's episode, but the reason why I wanted to research psychosis more is because of persecutory delusions. This is where someone strongly believes someone or a group of people is out to harm them, and a woman I know verbally attacked me because of these delusions. It led to a whole thing in our social group, and it was messy. Thankfully, everyone in our social group knows that this woman has a few mental health conditions and that I would never hurt her. So even though I now avoid her like the plague, I hope she does get better. In addition, you can have bizarre delusions where these are highly unlikely or just impossible in nature, such as people with psychosis believing that other people can hear their thoughts, or aliens have implanted thoughts inside their heads. And some of the most bizarre delusions are nihilistic in nature, like a person believing they don't exist. Finally, for this section, it's important to note that delusions and hallucinations are not exclusive of each other. Often, people with psychosis have both of these examples of positive symptoms. What are the negative symptoms of psychosis? Whilst the positive symptoms of psychosis are probably the most well known, the negative symptoms are very common too. These include an absence of experiences and other things that should be present in a healthy client. For example, cognitive impairment, including an inability to focus or have a slow cognitive processing speed, a violation, an inability to do something someone wants to do, poverty of speech content. When the person speaks, their words lack any substance. Poverty of speech or mutism. Typically, this involves one word or simple verbalizations or a complete lack of speech. Inappropriate or flat facial or emotional expressions. A lack of expression or an expression that is incongruent to the content, such as talking about being scared whilst grinning. Thought blocking. This is when the person with psychosis clearly has something they want to say or they're in the process of saying it and then they fall silent. Interestingly, they still appear to have something to say and on their mind, but they just can't get it out. Social withdrawal. They're disengaged from others, and people with psychosis often report it's because they often don't feel like they fit in because of their mental health condition or paranoia. What are the catatonic symptoms of psychosis? When a lot of people think about people in catatonic states, they often believe the person is in an unmovable, withdrawn, and silent state. However, in reality, a person in a catatonic state can be excited or withdrawn, so this means we need to split catatonic symptoms into two different categories. Firstly, when someone is in an excited catatonic state, they can act impulsively, seem agitated, perform meaningless and repetitive movements, mirror other people's movements, and echo other people's noises or verbalizations. Secondly, when someone is in a withdrawn catatonic state, they tend to hold strange postures for hours, and they can be placed in a posture by others as well, or they might remain rigid for hours so they're resistant to being moved by other people. Also, people in a withdrawn catatonic state don't tend to have facial expressions or speak at all, even though at times they might grimace and have no response to an external stimuli. What are disorganized psychotic symptoms? It means there are a few weird terms when it comes to mental health, because yet again, this term isn't what we typically associate with it, because instead of a person being disorganized, being a mess and a clutter, in this context, disorganized symptoms mean people with psychosis experience several thought disorganizations. There are 6 different examples of this thought disorganization. Clanging involves a person with psychosis using a sing-song or rhyming speech pattern, so the person is more interested in how what their sounds to them compared to what they're actually saying. Secondly, you can experience in circumstantial thought processes, where a person with psychosis doesn't get to the point of what they're saying linearly, since there are a lot of extra unneeded details that make the listener lose sight of the topic of the conversation, but the person eventually ties it all together. And this is a good reminder about why diagnosis needs multiple symptoms for a range of time, and these symptoms need to cause clinically significant levels of stress in multiple domains of functioning due to everyone that does this thought process every so often. And I've had conversations with people who do this naturally without psychosis. So it is the combination of other symptoms that means someone has psychosis. Thirdly, loose associations involve a person with psychosis drawing parallels between two related items, as well as flights of ideas or thought derailment, includes clients jumping between topics without fully completing their thoughts. Then, if the derailment is severe, then a client might be talking about their favourite car and then start talking about an unrelated topic without a transition or warning. Furthermore, word salad involves a gross inability for the person with psychosis to form any sort of verbal cohesion, so the words just pour out in a massive jumbled mess. Finally, neologism means new words, so someone with psychosis can say words that don't make much or any sense except to the client. Then the client tries to use these new words to describe some experience they've had, but don't use the words to describe it. Conclusion. Whilst this was definitely one of the more information-heavy podcast episodes that I've done in recent months, and I wasn't able to add in too much of my own thoughts and feelings, besides from being attacked and berated by someone with persecutory delusions, my experience of psychosis is just academic. I still enjoyed it. Since psychosis is a popular mental health condition to have in films, books, and TV programs, and whilst I always prefer positive depictions of mental health conditions, this doesn't happen with psychosis. This leads people to believe that psychosis is only hallucinations and delusions, but psychosis is so much more than that, as today's episode has shown. And I hope you found it as interesting, thought-provoking, and eye-opening as I did. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I know that I did, because I always like learning more about mental health conditions, and today's episode on psychosis just helped to nuance my understanding a lot more. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And if you want to learn more, definitely check out Clinical Psychology 2nd edition, available in all the usual places. And if you want to support the podcast on an ongoing basis, then please check out patreon.com/the Psychology World Podcast. Or if you want to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, now you can at buymeacoffee.com/Con Wiley. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwiley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.